guys, hello gorgeous. Alright, this is my spoiler Star Wars The Last Jedi review. This review is going to contain all sorts of spoilers, details, specific details talking about what happened in Star Wars The Last Jedi. So if you haven't watched the movie, either shut this off, or if you don't care about what happens in the movie before you see the movie, then feel free to watch. As I stated in my spoiler-free review, I was actually really satisfied with this film. I think the idea of rating Star Wars movies is completely asinine, but I think the idea of rating movies in general is asinine. Giving a movie a 5 out of 5 stars or a 10 out of 10 stars, or this is even sillier, the decimals, the 8.7 out of 10. All right. I don't think movies can be quantified, but I guess that's just human nature for a lot of people to try to quantify things. Something that gives them an unexplainable, intangible feeling. 7.2, that's how I feel. It doesn't work for me. So I'm not going to give a rating to this movie, and I don't rate the Star Wars movies. I don't go, the best is Empire, followed by Return of the Jedi, followed by... I'm not going to put them in order, because for me, Star Wars is something more than that. It's, I hate to use the word saga because they use it so much, but that's what it is. Like its own little world, like Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings movies I can't rate because it's all part of one really beautiful overarching story. So I'm not going to say that this is better than Jedi or A New Hope, or I'm not going to give one of those rating systems, but I will say that I really enjoyed it. And going back to last year's Rogue One, I enjoyed that one too, but I've always said that to me a great movie is one that I am going to want to watch again and again and again. It's replay value. And the greatest movies, the ones that I enjoy the most, are the ones that I've watched countless times. Some of them I even watch once a year. It's like a yearly tradition to watch Aliens and Predator, the original Star Wars trilogy. And those are just made with something intangible. You can't quantify it. There's no formula. God knows that movie studios, they keep trying to find this formula so they can churn these out and just make money hand over fist, but it's intangible. It's a heart and soul. And my favorite movies are the ones with so much heart and soul that I can watch them over and over again, and it just fills me up every single time. It's enjoyable. It's entertaining. I'm reminded of things. I'm inspired. I laugh. Sometimes I cry. But watching Star Wars The Last Jedi, I went in very apprehensive. I did not like the previous movie, The Force Awakens, at all. I was digging it up to the point where, spoiler, Kylo Ren kills his father, and that is something I fundamentally disagreed with. That was something I couldn't get over. I wasn't going to try to explain it away to make everything else work. There are certain things that seem a little off to me, and I let them slide, or I try to come up with, how do we make that work? Because the rest of it is so good. Let's just try to ignore this little speed bump. I'm able to compartmentalize and take things, even things that are really, really stupid. I can just drop that in the JJ garbage box right there. But that was something that I couldn't get past, because Star Wars, look, there's a reason why there's no swearing in Star Wars. There's a reason why there's no nudity in Star Wars. There isn't even any sex in Star Wars. They don't even shoot a lovemaking scene tastefully without any nudity. It's just not in there, because it's not necessarily just for children, but it's for the child in you. It's supposed to be pure, fun. It's not supposed to have the ugliness. It is about the dark side and evil, but it doesn't have like rape. It doesn't have sexual molestation, and it doesn't have a lot of the dark and dreary things that we have to deal with as human beings in the real world. So you can't do a movie titled Star Wars with the same opening theme and the crawl and a lot of the same characters, and then have a son kill his father. That just doesn't fit in the world of Star Wars. You can have a father almost kill his son, but he doesn't do it in Empire Strikes Back. You can have a son almost kill his father, but he doesn't do it. He doesn't go all the way with it. like in Return of the Jedi. But in The Force Awakens, I'm afraid that Harrison Ford's personal desire, maybe to never appear in another Star Wars movie and to take a giant payday for one Star Wars movie, interfered with the story. I've never said I had a problem with Han Solo dying, but I had a problem with him dying that way. And I also thought it was incredibly stupid. When you kill one of the main big characters of Star Wars, that's the end of your movie. That's the climax. That's the period. And you can do a little bit of aftermath dealing with what just happened and then end your movie. Force Awakens did not do that. They killed Han off and then they had their big space battle. And that to me felt like whoever's making this movie has a serious disconnect issue here. They don't understand what they did. Apathy. Apathy is how you are able to do something like that. You just don't care. We've got another thing to check off the list, space battle. We can fit that in right there, right after Han's death, with no concern whatsoever of what emotional state are people going to be in. The Last Jedi kills off Luke Skywalker in a way. And the reason that I'm not all that upset about it, I don't mind so much how they did it, was because that was the end of the movie. Luke Skywalker, if you've seen the movie, you know what happens. The force projection disappears, and then beautifully shot. It was almost like a tribute to the character. Incredible performance by Mark Hamill. It was one of those magic movie moments where everybody was firing on all cylinders. The lighting guys, the writing guy, the editing, the music, and Mark Hamill. Just a beautiful send-off to Luke Skywalker, even if he will appear again as a Force ghost to haunt Kylo Ren, his nephew. That to me felt definitive, and it felt proper. It felt like a fitting tribute to the guy I feel that Star Wars is the heart and soul of Star Wars. These are just my gut reactions to the movie. I just saw it about an hour ago, and I haven't really sat and pondered the story aspect of it a lot. I'm just sharing how I feel about it, and I got to say that when the movie was finished, when The Force Awakens was finished, I felt disappointed. I felt used. I felt like, well, they just got my money and I didn't get a movie. I waited the whole time for Luke. You put Mark Hamill's second billing on the poster, and in the credits, you are misleading your audience. Unacceptable treatment of the audience, trolling, not cool at all. This one, it felt like I got all the Luke that I wanted. Maybe more Luke would have been too much. I always say less is more. I didn't feel like we needed more Luke Skywalker. And I really don't mind, I'm not going to say I loved what they did with Luke Skywalker, because I had my own idea of what ended up happening to Luke Skywalker all those years later. But I was open to seeing another person's interpretation. And when I watch these new movies, even the other ones made by George Lucas, the official maker, when I watch these things, basically I go in, even if I have low expectations, I'm hoping it's good. I'm hoping I'll be proved wrong. I'm hoping that I'll really enjoy the movie. But if I see something I don't like, I have the confidence to just say that's not in my own canon, my head canon. I dismiss this. And I've done it with Star Wars movies before. Phantom Menace is really not in my own canon. I haven't watched it in years. I gave it enough tries, and it's a bad movie to me. I don't find it enjoyable, inspiring, entertaining, nothing. Same with Attack of the Clones. It's not a canon movie for me. And even Revenge of the Sith is okay, but I don't really have a desire to ever watch it again, other than to watch the duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan for the choreography. In terms of that particular story, I prefer the novelization of Revenge of the Sith. That book is the entire backstory to me. So that's my own personal little canon of Star Wars. And The Force Awakens, I just really disliked it, and it's not in my own personal canon. The Last Jedi, despite its, you could call them flaws or irritants, flies in the ointment, I think that it will be in my Star Wars canon. It feels to me like an appropriate ending to the original trilogy. After being so disappointed by The Force Awakens, I kind of retreated back into the original trilogy and felt like that's the era that I like. Everything else, everybody, you can enjoy that. Prequel lovers, enjoy your prequels. Sequel trilogy lovers, go watch them 10 times. That's cool. I'll be over here watching the OT, hoping that the original versions get released someday on Blu-ray. But this movie didn't feel like a more bunch of corporate garbage just designed to make money. It felt like it had heart and soul. I really have to applaud Rian Johnson. I know there's going to be a lot of people who hated the movie vehemently and aren't going to like hearing any praise from whatsoever, but it was just a feeling that I felt while I was watching the whole movie. It felt, and the key word is felt, like the original trilogy to me. Yes, it was a completely different style of story, a different flow to it, but it wasn't trying to be badass. That was one of the things that I was concerned about, because the word being used by a lot of people was badass. Last Jedi is badass. Kylo's so badass. Luke is badass. And I hate that word so much. If you want your credibility to plummet in my eyes, just describe something as badass and as if that's a positive thing. Oh, it's so badass. Badass doesn't mean anything to me. Badass is just something that people try to appear to be. The true badasses don't call themselves badass and they don't try to be badass. Clint Eastwood never tried to be a badass. He's just, that's his natural way. Charles Bronson, Lee Marvin, those guys are all natural badasses. And that is very rare in the world today. But what is in abundance is people trying to appear badass. Let's do this. That'll look badass. Let's do that. That'll look badass. I didn't feel like The Last Jedi was made by a guy trying to do badass things and trying to make characters appear badass. My read, I don't know much about Rian Johnson, but my read on the man after watching this film, I've seen Looper as well, but especially The Last Jedi, I think that he is probably an old soul. He's a very thoughtful person. He's also kind of a gray thinker, not black and white. Now, I love the original trilogy for its good versus evil, cartoonish kind of battles, you know, the hero versus the villain. But it's been done, and I really don't mind this gray version, this ambiguous, in-between version of Star Wars so much. Now that I've seen it done this particular way, I can live with this, but I don't feel as though give me more, give me more. But that's just my attitude with a lot of films. Less is more is one of my life philosophies, and this felt like the end of a saga. Probably because Luke Skywalker represents Star Wars to me so much, and to a lot of Star Wars fans, that this was a send-off. This was a closing of the book, closing of the Jedi scripture. Not exactly a page-turner, but I felt like it was a beautiful ending. I know George Lucas, after watching the movie, described it as beautifully made, and I would have to concur that it wasn't just pretty images. It was emotionally beautiful. It was about all the things that drew me to Star Wars in the first place, of hope, of family, of friends, of love, of the indomitable human spirit. I thought Carrie Fisher was so much better in this one than the previous one. I guess she shook off the acting rust in the previous movie, and she just seemed more genuinely Leia this time, or maybe it was the director that she was working with. Rian Johnson, just based on all of the performances in this film, a great actor is someone who just opens up and shares their heart and soul with the audience and the camera. That is a really hard thing to do, to not just share that with another person, but with this intimidating machine with this lens staring right at you. And I guess it speaks volumes about Rian Johnson, because he just seems like a guy who knows how to talk to actors, knows how to bring that out of them So the fact that not just Carrie Fisher, but everybody in this film was fantastic. Their performances were all great. Adam Driver, I thought, um, was not so much a petulant little brat in this movie. He comes off as a real brat in the first one, and just not a great villain for the movie. Just this annoying brat who couldn't care less if he was redeemed or not. I thought he had a little bit more heart in this one. And although they tried to do a scene with him and his uncle while he's sleeping to try to create a little bit of sympathy for Kylo, I still feel like the character is irredeemable. I still feel like a line was crossed. But it's interesting that in this story they actually address that. Luke Skywalker is the guy who's famous for never giving up on his father, never would give up on his father, and redeemed his father. It's interesting that in this movie, Luke felt as though Kylo was irredeemable, and a lot of people are finding that to be out of character. They think that it's not consistent with the Luke Skywalker character. But then to try to get people to accept that, they bring in the mother, Leia, and she goes, I know he's a piece of garbage. I know that he can't be saved. I know he's gone. So you got to admire Rian Johnson because he didn't write The Force Awakens. He was given the next movie and told, deal with that as you may, because nothing has been written beforehand. I don't think there was even like a general idea of where this story was going to go. So that's why I can't rag on Rian Johnson. In the situation that he was in, with the material that he was given to work with, all I can do is applaud, because I think he did a fantastic job with what he had to work with. All right, now the big flaws, the things that so many people are complaining about, and it's the deal breaker. The inconsistency with Luke's character. I was dreading that going into the movie as well. Apparently Mark Hamill has dropped some hints about how he disagreed with the take on the Luke Skywalker character as well. And I've said after The Force Awakens that Luke wouldn't quit, and neither would Han. It just felt stupid to me. Not consistent, and no reverence of the characters. Have both of those men run away from their problems. I thought that was reprehensible, and that's a huge reason why The Force Awakens, I'll never warm up to that movie because of what they did with those two characters. This movie, I thought if you're given that to work with and now explain it away, I got to say Rian Johnson did a commendable job. I didn't hate watching grumpy hermit Luke as much as I thought I would. Mark Hamill's performance was a big reason for that. I thought he was fantastic. But then I started to think about, what has this character been through? Just because I didn't hate it, and when I don't hate something, I start to think, how do we make this work? Because oftentimes the filmmaker doesn't fill in the blanks for you, especially in a corporate-driven Star Wars movie like this. If you want to know, you got to read the book and the comics and the games. But I started to think, how do we make this work? And I thought, maybe Luke Skywalker is just tired. And that's one of the things that this movie deals with. It's not just space battles and blasters and lightsabers. It's about these important life lessons. And maybe he's just tired. Maybe he's just been through too much. And maybe he reached his breaking point. And one of the ways that I explain what happens in the movie, explain the path of the Luke Skywalker character in this movie, if I choose to go along with it for future viewings. One of the ways I explain it is the Force lightning from Return of the Jedi. He got fried for quite some time, and I guess it's kind of silly to think there were no repercussions for that. There was a novel, it's considered legends now, called The Truce at Bacara, and Luke is dealing with the physical consequences of being fried so long, because Vader doesn't just go and save him right away. He gets fried for quite some time there before he's actually saved. But I was thinking maybe he's suffered some sort of neurological damage, and that might be crazy for some people to think. But if you need something, if you're like me and you're just on the cusp of really really enjoying this movie, wanting to love it, thinking, oh, it's got so much good stuff about it, but that Luke stuff is so wrong. Maybe you can think of it that way, that Luke Skywalker, in addition to everything else he has been through, all of the loss, all of the pain, all of the suffering, despite having a new sister and a best friend and a bunch of other friends, despite all of that, sometimes when you're cracked, you're cracked. And it doesn't matter how much you have and how much you've overcome. Sometimes when you're cracked, you're just cracked. And maybe by the end of Return of the Jedi, despite the smiles and and the ghosts looking at him and smiling and making him feel like everything was going to be all right, maybe he was just cracked and literally fried and suffered some sort of brain damage. There, I said it. Luke Skywalker possibly sustained brain damage after Return of the Jedi. And then that can go into that whole discussion, argument about the Force versus this crude matter. That the Force is this incredible, magical, timeless, eternal thing. And we are just this crude matter that breaks down. And Luke Skywalker has definitely emotionally broken down in this movie. He's obviously physically older. He doesn't move around so well. But emotionally, think about it. He's emotionally broken down. Not defending what they did in this movie. I think the whole thing of Luke trying to kill Kylo in his sleep, trying to kill Ben Solo in his sleep, is just as absurd as a lot of other Luke fans think it is. But when I try to do some brainstorming and think, how could he get himself in this situation? One of the only things that pop into my mind, if I don't just outright say garbage, forget it, don't buy it, not my cup of tea. If I try to explain it away, I would just say brain damage. That he had, like he said in the movie, a moment of weakness. And then if you can get past the actual action of igniting a lightsaber in front of his sleeping nephew, and he's gonna kill the proverbial Hitler before he grows up to do all of these acts of evil and save everybody the misery. If you can get yourself to that point and be okay with him contemplating the idea, then you can wrestle with the whole aspect of, but he didn't do it. He didn't go through with it. There is still that old goodness in Luke, that it's okay if a thought like that pops into your mind. I think it's a little extreme that he actually ignited the lightsaber. I wouldn't have gone that far. But stupid ideas pop into everybody's head from time to time. The important thing is what you follow through with and what you just slash through. Another thing I was really happy to see is that Luke hasn't been on that island by himself the whole time. There are actually island caretakers who take care of the island, help him with his, with his laundry, maybe with his food. So he's not alone. I mean, that was such a depressing thought to me, that this guy just went into exile and he's an absolute hermit. As you get older, I guess you do get more and more sick of people in general, maybe, depending on how many people you've dealt with and what situations you've dealt with in your life. But it was such a depressing idea to think that Luke Skywalker is on an island all by himself. And it felt like there were quite a few things in this movie where Rian Johnson was trying to fix what J.J. Abrams did in the last movie, or do away with it. There didn't seem to be a lot of reverence for what J.J. established in the previous movie. So when these island caretakers just show up out of nowhere, instead of me going, oh, come on, where'd they come from? They weren't at the end of the last movie. No, I went, good call, because Luke is trying to live a simpler life. Even though he's cut himself off from the Force, I think he's never been closer to it, because he's just out in this beautiful ocean island, and with these very nice, sweet, simple people. That's the best company possible. I think that goes from being a depressing ending to the Luke Skywalker character to that guy actually made out pretty well. He's living with apparently really, some decent folks. He's got these cute porgs around. The milking thing was weird. But I guess that was just to show an aspect of how disconnected he's become, how much he doesn't care, and he'll just sit down and milk a thing and drink its milk right there. And he didn't just even the quick look that he shot Rey, he doesn't care. So I personally wouldn't have done a Luke Skywalker runs away, runs from his responsibility, runs away from his mistake story. But if I was given one, then I would like to think that this is what I would do with it. And then the finale of the movie with Luke Skywalker showing up as a Force projection, loved it because when Mark Hamill started growing out the beard and growing his hair out just a bit, I thought, oh, he's perfect. He just looks exactly like Return of the Jedi Luke and grew a beard and a little bit older. But then he kept growing the hair and kept growing the beard, and he just turned into this scraggly, disheveled, old wizard-looking guy, and I did not like that look at all. So I just absolutely love the fact that the Force projection he uses at the end of the movie is his younger, idealized self. Again, it echoes what we've seen in the original trilogy when Anakin Skywalker appears as a ghost. I'm an old school fan, so Sebastian Shaw will always be my Anakin Skywalker ghost. But even if you go with a Hayden ghost, it's Anakin as he should have been. The idealized version of Anakin Skywalker, even though he never actually appeared that way, whether it's the Shaw ghost or the Hayden ghost. So I love that Luke chooses that image of himself for his Force projection, because that, regardless of what happened with Luke ending up on that island and being this disheveled old cranky hermit, that's the idealized Luke. And we got to see him. We got to see him reunite with Leia. Some people say, no, it wasn't a real reuniting. Okay, if that's how you feel, awesome. But I felt like it was not just a genuine reuniting between Luke and Leia, but I thought it was even better than if Leia reunited with the old scraggly hermit. The projection doesn't just, to me, represent a visually better looking Luke Skywalker. It represents a more emotionally intact, emotionally in control, and more peaceful-minded Luke Skywalker. When he's on the island, he looks cracked. He's got the watery eyes and the wild look in his eye, and he looks like he's at the end of his rope and has been for 10 or 20 years or whatever it's been. The Force projection Luke just has that zen, that calmness about him, that Jedi master ness about him that we've all been wanting, that we wanted to see in The Force Awakens, and we were not allowed to see it. And the fact that he fights Kylo Ren at the end without actually doing any fighting whatsoever, it's all dodging moves, the Matrix dodge. Again, beautifully shot, beautifully choreographed, beautifully edited. I loved the long shots, the scope, really fitting stage for this epic encounter between the uncle and the nephew. And it just felt to me like a fitting end to the Luke Skywalker character. There's been so many iconic characters who are done away with no reverence whatsoever. They died in some crappy little corner of the galaxy or the planet, and it just wasn't fitting to the grandeur that came before. And I just saw that shot of Luke with the robe flowing behind him and Kylo in front of him and all the walkers, just, flat land as far as the eye could see. And I thought, perfect, absolutely perfect stage. The final goodbye for Luke Skywalker. And then to cut from that, where he disappears, back to the island, and we find out it was actually a projection. Even more beautiful. Back to the gorgeous twin sunset. I just was overwhelmed with good feelings. I thought such a beautiful send-off to the character of Luke Skywalker. I thought for a split second about the crappy send-offs that so many beloved characters have had. Han Solo in the previous movie, what a crappy send-off. Luke Skywalker was treated, I thought, with love and respect in this movie. who knows what happens behind the scenes that, unfortunately, a lot of the time will interfere with a good story, depending on contracts and how much someone gets paid and how much screen time. But I felt good feelings at the end of this movie. I thought it was a fitting tribute, send off to Luke Skywalker. Felt like it was the final chapter, the epilogue of the original trilogy. And I'm one of those audience members going, where do they go from here? It feels like a lot of the stuff JJ set up just got thrown over the shoulder like Luke does at the beginning of the movie. I was a little worried about that scene. I thought one of the things that ruins so many movies is bathos, where something is built up to be a powerful moment and then someone farts or some stupid joke is cut. And it represents an inability to be sincere about things. It's an emotional immaturity. And when I heard that Luke Skywalker throws the lightsaber over his shoulder, I thought, is this going to be bathos? Because that's how the first movie ends. I mean, the big moment, and his eyes are filled with tears, and what's going to happen? Is he going to say, "You're my daughter," or something? And just to throw it over, I thought, are they going to play it as a joke? But, while it was kind of funny, it wasn't really played up as a joke. It was played up to show just how much Luke doesn't care anymore. He has become very apathetic to the whole thing. I think that's where a lot of the people who are disliking the treatment of Luke in this movie comes from. They're not really understanding what plane Luke is on. I think he's operating on an enlightened plane. And there's a lot of people in our world that they have existential crises, or they learn about enlightenment, self-actualization. And what happens with the other people who haven't done that work, that introspective thought, they start to call these other people crazy. Oh, he's gone crazy. She's gone crazy. Oh, they're out to lunch. They're so different. When you don't have any desires anymore, genuinely no desires, when you have become aware of your own ego and possibly even experienced, as Eckhart Tolle describes as ego death, when you're no longer driven by what 99% of the population is driven by, 99% of the population will think you're weird or strange or crazy. And I got the feeling watching this movie that Luke Skywalker just doesn't have any desires anymore. That he doesn't care. He won't take his own life, so he's just gone to this place to he ran away. I still believe that, and I still think that's crap from the first movie. But I don't think he's personally invested in anything like most of the other characters are in the movie and in the previous movie and in the original trilogy. I think he is just that, almost like a spirit of Obi-Wan or spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn or spirit of Yoda. Like, he's still in his mortal form, but he's more spirit-like, aside from the grumpiness, the crotchetiness, that he's just disconnected from the whole thing. And there are some lines that talk about that if you really, when he's speaking to Rey, if you look at the big picture, what's it all about? Like, you're so invested in this battle and that battle and defeating this person and that person. And Luke is just sitting there thinking, man, we all just seem really insignificant when you step back far enough away, especially when you are tapped into the Force as far as that reaches. That must make you feel really insignificant, and all your problems and your desires to feel just really insignificant. So that approach makes me understand that decision to go with Luke in that direction. I wasn't stamping my feet and clenching my fists and going, this is garbage, how dare they destroy the character of Luke. I didn't think it was character assassination. I'll always remember The Last Jedi as Rian Johnson making chicken salad out of chicken, So that's my Star Wars Episode 8 Last Jedi review. This one is really going to split the audience, split the Star Wars fans. I think more than a lot of the previous entries, Star Wars fans are either going to love this or hate this. The problem with being this far into the saga is that a lot of us already have our ideas on where things need to go. That was one of my problems when watching the prequels, that I already thought I knew where the characters and story should go. Although I blame George Lucas for that, because he left the breadcrumbs in the original trilogy and then decided not to follow his own established path, I felt. But with these new movies, I'm not really invested in them, especially now that they have gotten rid of Luke and Han, and unfortunately Carrie Fisher has passed away. In terms of where they go with the next one, this one really feels definitive, and I don't. It's going to be very interesting to, after watching Rian Johnson pick up where JJ left off and just go in such a different direction, and so often not seem to care about where JJ was going. It'll be very interesting to see what JJ Abrams does now, picking up where Rian Johnson left off. I really hope that this doesn't turn into a petty feud between egotistical directors, because I think Rian is operating maybe on a different plane, where he is trying to convey more soulful lessons. Some of these are taboo. I'm actually surprised that some of these concepts and ideas were allowed into the movie by a big corporation like Disney. There is a recurring message of not just war is bad, but who profits on war. And there's this ambiguous take about how there are people who profit off of both sides of war. There's money being made not just from the First Order, but also the resistance or the rebellion. It's all one big money-making machine. And the only thing I can speculate is that the end game, it was already sort of hinted in The Last Jedi, the end game is that both sides realize, hey, wait a second, we need to stop fighting because the real evil people are making all the profit here, and we're being played like tools. So I think that's one way to go with the traditional good versus evil struggle, is to have both sides go, wait a second, this is not the way to do things. There's other ways, more civilized ways to disagree and to work things out, and to just civilly respect differing opinions. Quick note about Benicio del Toro. I did enjoy his character as well. I thought he was quirky in a cool Star Wars way. I liked his little stutter too. He didn't have a lot of screen time, but I felt like even though Lando wasn't in this movie, and the casino scene would have been a perfect spot for a little Lando appearance, Benicio kind of filled that Lando void for me. The same type of can you trust him character. And I concur with a lot of people who say that Finn was pretty much wasted in this movie. Nothing he did was really important, but I do think there was some value to what him and the new character Rose were up to. You can't have the whole movie just be about Luke and Rey on the island. You have to cut to something. And so that's what they cut to. It had to be there. I think if you were to remove all that stuff, it would have been too much Luke and Rey. You would have lost the specialness of those scenes. So while it didn't seem to me like what they were doing was all that important, I did understand the importance to the overall structure of how the movie was edited. And Leia in space, a lot of people are laughing at that, thinking it was silly. I didn't have a problem with it. I guess it was built up to be a lot worse than what I actually saw on screen. It was about time we got to see Princess Leia, General Leia, do something Force-related other than sensing. That's all that she's ever been given to do in the previous movies, sense things through the Force. So, it was a fine scene. I liked the fact that it wasn't hokey and cheesy, that she was actually in space, and it was beautifully shot, and you can actually see frost on her. So there were consequences. It wasn't just her Supermaning back into a ship and walking around and giving orders. She was in a coma for a while afterwards. So I didn't have any issue with that. But another thing I did have an issue with, and it seems to be a growing thing in the Kathleen Kennedy run Lucasfilm, Star Wars films, is feminism is creeping into these movies more and more. I don't have any problem whatsoever with the main character being a female. There's been so many male main characters in Star Wars, it's about time a female character was the main character in Rey. But what I noticed in some recent Rebels episodes is the overabundance of female characters when the equalitist in me wants equality. What I see happening with a lot of feminist-driven shows and movies is that it is becoming skewed to the other side, which is not a good thing either. Balance is what's important. And so a shining example in this movie that I noticed, certainly not enough to ruin the movie or even ruin the scene for me, but it made me go, there we go again, is that after General Leia, the leader of the Resistance, who is a female, which I have no problem with whatsoever, I love it, just to be clear, when she is incapacitated because she was out in space, a female something, general, I don't know what she was, lieutenant. So you got another high-ranking official who's also a female. Again, that's fine. Says, and we're going to bring in our replacement until General Leia is well again. And they bring in Laura Dern, who is another high-ranking female. And I know there's people who are going to say you're a male chauvinist, but I'm not. I genuinely am a feminist, but I also genuinely am a masculinist, which genuinely makes me an equalitist, or however you pronounce it. And so, like I talked about in on the Armchair Directors channel about a particular episode of Rebels, where it just felt like it's all women. There's a girl who's the leader of the Mandalorians, and her mother, and the second in command, and another person higher ranking, and they're all like, can we have one male in here? So same goes for that scene. If you want equality, I don't want it all to be men. I think it's been too much men and we need equality. But in that particular scene, I think that the feminist running the company, that her influence is really showing through in a scene like that. If you want equality, then your female General Leia, have a male high-ranking official say, and our new leader is going to be Laura Dern. Have a male do it. Or have another female, high-ranking female, say, our new leader is, and have it be a male character who takes over until Leia is well enough to do it again. And there's these little things that they throw in these movies that maybe some people won't notice, but I'm noticing it, and I'm just thinking, that's not equality. That's not even feminism. That's feminism gone wrong. All right, that's my Star Wars Last Jedi review. I feel like I've said a lot, but I feel like there's so much more to say, which again makes me feel like it's similar to an original trilogy movie. There's so much that went on in here. This maybe even could have been split into two movies, or Rian Johnson said there was a longer cut, maybe a 3-hour cut, 3.5-hour cut. Maybe this movie could have even been two movies, two 2-hour movies, because quite a bit happens, and I thought it was a satisfying emotional payoff. If you have a comment about The Last Jedi, scroll down and go to town. To join the tribe, hit subscribe, and if you want to support the channel, be sure to visit my Patreon page listed in the show notes below. Nerdmas Day. See you around, kid.